Welcome back to Morning Express. It's now 10 minutes after 7, time for us to have the State of the Nation. Now, on State of the Nation, we normally put our pulse on the nation and find out whether we are healthy or we need something required to be done. And of course, right now, we have just come from a very hotly contested electioneering period. And by nature, elections are divisive because you have people with different ideas coming together and, basically competing for certain seats. But of course, we know that that was very, very divisive in the sense that there were those who felt that it was a sham of an election and all sorts. But where is our problem? And this morning, we'd like to look at that and see how this country can begin to heal. And I'll start by, first of all, introducing our guests this morning. And I'll start with my extreme left, where we have Wanjiru Gikonyo, who is the National Coordinator for Institute of National Accountability. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Institute for Social Accountability.
Social Accountability, I beg your pardon. We also have Dr. Kitiabi, who's a Governance and Public Sector Analyst. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And let's start by, first of all, just finding out what Kenyans feel. We went up and about the streets, basically asking them what they feel Kenya needs as a solution for us to move forward and heal as a country.
I think for both leaders to compromise and say, we need to get down and discuss about the country and moving forward. I know some of us are bitter about what happened. Others are happy, and that's what democracy brings. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves a very simple question. We have so many Kenyans who are living in poverty, so many Kenyans who can't afford basic things like food and shelter. So I believe that it's time we put the economy before all the politics and get back to business and try and make this country a better place for all of us.
A lot of reconciliation needs to be done because the country is deeply, deeply divided. And the division is not only with the people, the division is everywhere, even in the institutions, the government organizations. So I think the president has a huge task ahead.
President na opposition wakae pamoja waongee ili hizo donda zikuwe healed, ndio at least Wakenya watakuwa pamoja.
And that's what Kenyans had to say. We'll also be joined shortly by Wanjiru Gikonyo, just to continue with this discussion. But let me start with you, ladies, and I'll start with you, Wanjiru. We are, as a country, divided. First of all, do you agree that we are divided? And secondly, this division may not necessarily just have been brought about by the election, per se. There is a history, and for us to solve or to look forward and project on what we need to do, we cannot ignore that history. We have a tendency, or we have this statement in Kenya where we say, let's accept and move on. What does that mean? So, first of all, do you agree that we as a country are divided?
Well, I think as long as you're living in Kenya and are able to follow the politics, it would be disingenuous, very dishonest to say we are not divided. But I think more than divided, our politics has been conducted in a way that dehumanizes the opposition or the opponent. And I think we saw that in before 2007, where the kind of political diatribe, the statements made about the other, the block characterizations of these people and what they don't do, enemies of development, that was propagated. And that is usually a tool used to actually lay a foundation, or lay a foundation actually for violence. And in 2007, we saw what happened. And if you recall, Maina Kiai, who was then, I believe, was he with the National Commission on Human Rights? Had took MPs to Rwanda and said, when you have verbal instigation, verbal violence begets the physical violence. So we've seen, once again, this dehumanization, this very strong political diatribe that categorizes Luos and NASA supporters as, as a lower class of citizen. And what we have seen that lay the foundation for is the state crackdown, the use of violence, the killing, really against constitutional principles, against human rights principles, international principles, against basic human security and decency. We've seen the use of state force against its own civilians, killing members of the public who are exercising, in some cases, their constitutional right to demonstrate and, you know, really express their dissatisfaction with what they viewed as a very unfair process. So rather, more than divided, we are seeing this dehumanization of opposition, of civil society.
Is the dehumanization just against the opposition, or is it generally in the political platform where we have verbal abuse of each other to a point where it degenerates to where now it is categorized those people or these people or our people and their people?
What I think is that the language has been instrumentalized, and it's a political tool. In 2007, Jubilee had the ICC. Then, of course, it was TNA that had the ICC as a big rallying call. And it was necessary to create this us against them using the ICC. So that it was them, those who took us to the ICC, and it was you who are going to protect us from this external, affront on our sovereignty. Now, there was no such clear divide. And this campaign went more ethnic than other campaigns go. Of course, in Kenya, voting is based on ethnic blocks. That's a reality. That's why there's a call to change our political electoral system so that politicians stop having to mobilize ethnic blocks and then use very, very inflammatory language. Now, the reason I say I don't agree it's equal across both sides is because the Jubilee administration actually has a very strong agenda. I believe if you read the trajectory of their actions, they actually have a very strong state reorganization that's going on. And part of that is to lay the foundation for very strong autocratic rule. They want to use the sense that there are risks to our business, risks to our security, that the state must actually suspend rights and use excessive force, and so that the country then is not going to cry out when they see their fellow brothers and sisters being killed because of state using force, using intimidation. And that also has linkages with other aspects of the political agenda. Every political party, every administration has an agenda. And it's important for us to ask, what is the agenda of the Jubilee administration? And part of that is they need to use strong force because they don't want opposition. They don't want questions. They don't believe in the Constitution. For some reason, they feel that, and the president has said it severally, I cannot rule, my hands are tied, I can't fight corruption because of this Constitution. So this idea that they need excessive force, they need absolute force, they need autocratic force. In fact, it's being called, as a symbol of, some kind of fascist intent where we will give you development, you do not, and suspend your human rights, because human rights, democratic rights, then is inimical to development, which isn't true. So the bigger, yes, we have a political system that has created this divide, but we also have the nature of the politics of the administration.
All right. Yeah. Allow me to bring in Dr. Kitiabi. Do you agree that that's part of what is causing us to be where we are today? And first of all, do you even agree that we are divided as a nation?
Yes, absolutely. I think what Wanjiru is saying is quite correct, and you have to look at it from several sides. I think she's coming from the social democratic, side, but also you have to look at the institutional side. The reason we are having all this, the reason, as she said, the president says, I cannot work, I cannot do this, but at the same time, he's doing things that don't help the country. I mean, you cannot, for example, remove institutions that usually work or influence or go and put people who don't have the level of competence. You see, you can have competence, yes, but there are certain institutions that you must put people who have a certain level of competence. I cannot come here and do your job. I am competent, but I cannot come here and do your job. So we have institutions which have been overseen by the Jubilee administration that are totally not working. And IBC is a very good example. These institutions are not working. If you go to the government, for example, I can ask you, why is it that we removed the former institution, DPM, the institution that used to look at all the institutions and say who is qualified, who is going where do we lack competence. Now we removed that institution, and we have this amorphous institution that brought that was going to...
Allow me to pause you there, because you've talked about the IEBC, and one of the questions we've asked today is whether it should be disbanded. And you mentioned that, for instance, Jubilee want to work with or are working with the IEBC. Yet again, that is the only constitutional body that is allowed to arbitrate for the election. There is no other body. It's not like there's a choice.
The issue is not that they're working with the IEBC. The issue is that IEBC is not performing. That's the point. And if you're the CEO...
Is that Jubilee's mandate to ensure that they're performing?
Of course, yes. Of course, yes.
Isn't that Jubilee and NASA's responsibility?
No.
Not
of course, yes. If you are in government and you are the CEO of government, your job is to make sure that all the institutions, including the ones that were promulgated with the Constitution of 2010, are actually working and performing. It is not the work of people who are outside the institution. It is the work of the person who is the CEO. So maybe we should be asking ourselves, who is the CEO?
Okay,
why
and that
is
is clear. We know
working?
that the president currently is the CEO. But
Yes.
then are we saying we are where today purely because of the president?
Yes, because IBC is not the only institution. By the way, there are linkages to these institutions. She has just mentioned the brutality and what's going on in the security sector. You need the security sector to do elections. By the way, I was one of those people who managed the elections when I had just come out of university. I managed the elections, the first elections in 1994 in South Africa. And it is very, very important that an institution that is managing elections, first of all, has the required level of competence. And then that those people must be above board. There is no other way. They have to be above board. And then that those people can coordinate with the security, can coordinate with the county, institutional structures, can coordinate with the education system, because we were using their institutions to, there's no other way to do it. And right now, Kitonga, whether we like it or not, that is not the situation.
All right. Let me bring in Wanjiru Kihoro. Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. And, well, you are there as the debate was beginning, and I'd like to hear your opening remarks as to why we are where we are today as a country.
We are where we are today, and that is 53 years after independence, because of where we have come from. And if you look at 53 years of independence, we have basically, in a big way, squandered our independence. We have failed to address the socio-economic issues which were there at independence. And through this period now, they have become aggravated. This country, in a period of 53 years, has grown in population from 7 million people we had in 1863 to nearly 50 million. And you can imagine, we have been whipping the colonial infrastructure for that long period. And you can see where it has brought us. So we can say that during 1960s, this country tried to look at the issues. It got divided. There was KPU and there was KANU. That did not work. Some went to detention, others were left to continue. Then, 20 years of one-party state, up to 1982, the issue became aggravated. There was no debate that we could be able to carry on with. And when the multi-party system came in 1982, you can see how much now the issues have come to the fore because people are now able to speak. 20 years now of multi-party system, 25 years of multi-party system, the elections have become more furious. 1982, there were 17 members of parliament who were elected and opposed. Now, how would that happen? in 1982. 17 members of Parliament.
So what would you say is our problem? Because according to her, she says that our issue is basically down to the CEO. We've had several CEOs running.
I don't.
All right. Wanjiru.
I want to pick up on the issue of the IBC. And the question you're asking is, whose fault was it? And I want to go back to the issue that I was, trying to put forward, that yes, we know we have a history. And any party that goes into government, any administration knows we have a history. We have a Truth and Justice Commission report that was supposed to be implemented as part of dealing with that history. Now, this administration shelved that report. So, it's very good to go back to a very long way away, but we do have a remedy. As imperfect as that report was, we have the Dongo Land Commission report, again, similarly shelved, right? So let's look at intent. For me, I say, yes, we have a history, we have a political system that's broken, but when we're talking about underlying causes, I say that the Jubilee administration has a political re-engineering process going on, and that re-engineering is really to bring in a level of autocracy. Really a strong hand to be able to make decisions without checks and balances. So they do not tolerate civil society dissent. They do not accommodate opposition dissent. So how does that link in with the IBC? Under this administration, and we've always had a weak assembly, we've always had weak oversight. Yeah. And one of our big weaknesses is we have political leaders who go in there who then really betray the citizens. But what we've seen unique under this administration that we didn't see with the Kibaki administration is the deliberate interference with the independence of institutions. The one executive power, government will always try and exceed its powers because they have a political mandate. They need to get votes so that they can come back. So all over the world, you have executive arms of government trying to overstretch. And the role of the assembly is to push them back in. The role of the judiciary is then to ensure they have complied with the laws. But when this administration is trying to interfere and destabilize and not respecting the constitutional mandates of all other institutions. So we have a weakening of oversight, and this actually is a big threat to our sovereignty, to our democratic rights. And this is part of the nature of this administration. We didn't see it with the Kibaki administration. We did see it in a very strong way with the Moi regime. But the Moi regime was not governed by a democratic constitution. So the underlying issues are historical. The Jubilee administration has not used the tools that are available to deal with historical. They have shelved it and they are saying, let's move forward. But more to that, they need a strong hold of government and do not tolerate independence of institutions. You've seen with the Auditor General. Auditor General is one of the Chapter 15 institutions, because there are several, that are supposed to provide another layer of horizontal oversight over government. The Auditor General has been preparing reports showing how 50% of our budget cannot be accounted for. Possibly 40% or 45% is actually being used illegally in contravention with the law, and maybe only less than 10% is actually being used prudently. There have been consistent attacks on the Auditor General. And in fact, if he manages to remain in office for the rest of his term, it's due to the constitutional protections given. Why would an administration that has rampant corruption then go against an Auditor General who is performing? Because they do not appreciate independent institutions. Right. So this is what we saw with the IBC. The manipulation of the IBC is what Wachira Maina was saying. Instead of rule of law, you have rule by law, where you have laws that are then being manipulated, and institutions are manipulated. They then do the bidding of the state. It's state interference, and we've also seen that with the police. We've seen that, very unfortunately, with the National Cohesion Commission, which is the one that's supposed to be dealing with some of these underlying factors.
Allow me to also now bring in the aspect of, you've talked about the Jubilee administration, and do we have clear definition of what the opposition has in terms of agenda to give us an alternative? Daktari.
I think that the opposition in all countries, opposition play a big role, yeah. And as she has said, they also are part of oversight. You know, they are the ones who are supposed to say that what you're doing with the auditor,
the resources,
yeah, the resources, and what you're doing with the Auditor General is not good. What you're doing
that is true,
with
but
IBC,
but there are also there's a difference between being government in waiting and waiting to be in government. Government in waiting should also give us a clear roadmap that if we were to take over the country, this is our plan. This is how we're going to deal with the things that have bedeviled us for years.
Yes, and I thought that's what the opposition does in their manifesto. It does that in their manifesto. So if you want to see maybe what NASA, you know, what plan they had, you would go to their manifesto. But coming to how institutions, you cannot tell the opposition, for example, or you cannot tell civil society, or you cannot tell universities that they cannot, you know, point out the downfalls or the pitfalls in the way institutions in government
I want us to look at solution. It's not that they cannot point them out, but they can point them out and give us direction. Do you feel confidently that there is a roadmap? Because the reason I'm coming to that is because if we look at even the opposition, they have had opportunities to deal with some of these historical injustices.
Yes.
But can we confidently say that they have actually done something? Look at milestones and say, this is what, while so-and-so or this group of people that when they're in government, these are the milestones that they set to make sure that some of these historical injustices are done.
Actually, unfortunately, Kitonga, if you look at how we came to the Constitution of 2010, it was purely an opposition move and also the civil society. I mean, the civil society, I was in this country when we were going to Bomas. I was in this country before that. And what the people who are pushing us to get a new constitution, to get all these new institutions that the Jubilee administration has come and are now interfering with, are the opposition. I mean, we should put history where it is. Most of these people who are, if you look at the people who are in the Jubilee government right now, they opposed those things of making Kenya have a new dispensation. They were very happy to be in the dispensation that she had just eloquently described. So we should put history on the table.
So you would say, as far as you're concerned, the opposition has given a clear roadmap of how this country should run. Not just criticizing, but also giving a roadmap. Because I think we need to talk solutions.
Yes, like for example, let's take the IEBC for example. I was sitting in the University of Nairobi and wondering, okay, what is the problem? Why can these people talk about the problems in IEBC? I am an expert. I can see those problems. I can still see those problems. Why is it that one side is saying, I can't see the problems, the other one is saying, I can't see the problems? And if I got NASA right, they had actually a batch of listed, what they called irreducible minimums, which were really solutions on how to move forward. And now we are in a situation where they did not participate in the elections. We have now a problem. We are now created another problem where now they are saying, since we did not participate in the elections, we are not also going to participate in building the nation.
All right. Well, they'll build the nation, but I guess using other means other than what is we know as Parliament and the Senate. Mr. Kihoro, your thoughts on whether we have a clear roadmap. And I want us, if possible, to look at solutions away from just political parties per se, but from a governance perspective. Because we have had different regimes. You've clearly said for 54 years, the country is not just the last 5 years of Jubilee, although that may be taking us back. According to some may say that we've made progress. But from a governance perspective, what ails us?
I can say that 54 years down the line, there are socio-economic issues that are very fundamental. There are poverty issues. Our hospitals don't run. If you go to our schools doing badly, even though I congratulate the children who have done very well in their CPE, a lot of institutions in this country have not been working for a long time. And IEBC cannot work when other things are not working. They cannot work. So what we need is like a national conference What ails our country? It cannot be that every 5 years, what you have seen in 1982, the only election where you can say there was no violence and there was no tension and people are happy is 2002. Yeah. Look at all the others, what has happened. We don't want to be going through this process. Every 5 years, whatever you try to build, you dismantle in 5 years. You still have the IDPs in place. Why can't the government do something about it? God will not recreate Kenya into a double-story building so that we can set our people. Land in Kenya, the way it is, 225 million square miles, 1,000 square miles, that is what we have to share and that is what we have to work with. Look at how much we have done to agriculture in this country. Look at the sugarcane farmer in Western Kenya. Look at the sugarcane farmer, actually. If I tell you that there was sugarcane industry on the coast, Ramisi Sugar Factory, you tell me it is history and doesn't matter. It matters a lot because that was employment. Today we are taking sugar from Brazil. Why should we? Or from Mauritius, or some other distant place, but we are oppressing our farmer, oppressing our sugarcane farmer, our coffee farmer, our tea farmer, agriculture.
Let's talk
That
solutions.
is why 80% of Kenyans are. 80% of Kenyans are in agriculture. They become poorer. I think if you look at it from a realistic point of view, you'd say the Kenyan people have become 20, 25 times poorer than what they have been before. And poverty aggravates the situation, and that is what we have to address. Poverty, disease, and ignorance.
Okay.
In fact, I'd like to jump into the question that you asked about the opposition and a roadmap. And I'd like to say, one, I feel the opposition squandered their opposition role over the last 5 years. They went in and were defeated by the tyranny of numbers mentality and didn't give enough pushback. Of course, when there's a tyranny of numbers, it becomes very difficult to exercise your oversight, but there are opportunities that they had that they did not utilize. So they were not an effective opposition. And one example is their role in Senate, because devolution is a cornerstone has always been a cornerstone of ODM, of now even of NASA, just by the very ideological nature. But when they went in, you found leading senators in the Senate proposing bills that then were inimical to devolution. So the party was not strong in whipping its positions in the House. And even you saw that, like as chair of the PAC, the Parliamentary Accountability Committee, you saw the debacle under the leadership of ODM. So I would say that the opposition squandered their role in Parliament, and that is a disservice to its followers. But then I will go on and say there is a divide that is not really being spoken about between Jubilee and NASA, because NASA are social democrats, and if you look at their policies, they are talking about inclusive development. They are talking about dealing with inequality, where you have, because our economic system is actually based on a few large companies and very, very small, provision by informal trade and lowly paid staff. So you get very high inequality. So one of the big pushes that, in fact, Raila Odinga has had since 2007 has been this issue of social democracy, where you change the way we do our governance. On the other hand, Jubilee are saying, we are going to be efficient, we are going to do infrastructure, this infrastructure is going to bring jobs, and they have a whole rationale. So there is an ideological agenda that is different, and I think it would do the media service to actually interrogate these two positions because they have a bearing on us. Vision 2030 is a very capitalistic national vision, and one of its key priorities is large infrastructure. And if you look at the impact of large infrastructure, look at the Eurobonds and everything going into SGR, the argument is you're putting money into large infrastructure and you're leaving out basic services, which are the foundation actually of economic development. If we take the example of agriculture that Wanjiru has just talked about, Vision 2030 talked about this big Galana irrigation scheme. But if you look at other countries that have grown, where you have a majority of the workforce in agriculture, you don't do large irrigation, large schemes. What you do is you build up small-scale the Githongori, the kind of Githongori farmers model, where you look at industries, you look at sugarcane farmers and say, how do we help them organize themselves so that they can increase their profits as they are? You do smaller scale, lower technology, which can then be manufactured by the juakali industry, so that you can also bring up the juakali.
You grow the economy as it were from the bottom.
Exactly. As opposed to doing large infrastructure, which depends on imports, where you're importing all the equipment, the parts,
The national debt.
the technology.
The national debt.
So there is an ideological, ideological difference that we haven't sufficiently interrogated. And my view is that we need, one of the national discussions that has to happen is on Vision 2030. Because Vision 2030 is driving us into debt. It's putting money where there will not be many jobs created. The returns of those investments are very long-term. You've had DVD, even before he went in to join the opposition. As an economist, he did some, he was telling us, look, you borrow this money, it's going to pay off in 50 years' time. We have a youth bulge that needs to be capitalized right now. That money needs to go into education, needs to go into TVET. So these discussions, I think, the Vision 2030 for me has to be part of the discussion agenda, because I believe it is driving us the wrong way. Yeah.
All right. Now, with the Supreme Court upholding the win of President Uhuru Kenyatta, we now see a difference, and the president has got a responsibility. So the President Uhuru Kenyatta, after an election that NASA boycotted, questions about the future of the opposition have emerged. While NASA leaders say their People Assembly's agenda will run concurrently with Parliament and are non-committal about attending House sitting, their Jubilee counterparts are not moved by the threats. They say they have the numbers. Let's listen into what's been happening.
There are things that we will participate in, there are things we will not participate in. But I want to tell you that the People's Assembly will run parallel to what we call a National Assembly. And very soon, the People's Assembly may overtake the National Assembly. But going forward, there are cases that we may decide to sit in Parliament. But when we are discussing illegalities, like if you bring the cabinet appointed by Uhuru Kenyatta for us to approve, we can't sit.
At any given time, Jubilee Party alone has 170 members. Plus our affiliate parties, we have 214 members. So this House can transact business in the next 5 years with or without the presence of NASA.
Dr. Kitiabi, are we drifting further apart?
Exactly. Those two statements tell you that you're drifting further apart. And those two statements also, I'm surprised that we are saying let's look at Vision 2030. What Duale should be telling us is how the majority in Parliament are going to make sure that we are coming together, and that they are going to make sure that the Vision 2030 is accomplished. I have never heard that from Duale. And yet he has been for how many years now? Almost 5. Yeah, so the problem is those documents are there. These people, what they have just said now is taking us apart. It's taking themselves, the two of them. Can you imagine now if you were asked to go and mediate between the two? What Duale has just said and what Mbadi has just said.
Question then,
the distance is growing.
It's growing, but it's growing on that level. And what benefit does it have for the Mwananchi on the ground? Either way, whichever way you look at it, how do I benefit as Wanjiru, as the person who went and voted or did not vote, depending on which, how does any of their stand help me?
It just makes your stand worse, your position worse, because that means when you have conflict in any organization, when you have conflict or when you have disagreement, performance goes down. There's no output. And when there's no output, of course, the Wanjikos of this world and the Otienos of this world suffer. It's you and me who is going to suffer if this government, this parliament again, goes for 5 years without performing.
All right, Wanjiru, truth be told, the leaders that we have today, despite the disagreements they have, they will go home and, I mean, if we were to break it down to the bare minimums, they will go home and have their food. They will go home and still their electricity will run because they have other resources. Right. But Wanjiru, meanwhile, is suffering. Look at the protracted electioneering period we had, and it's because of some of the disagreements. There are those who literally have felt that pinch, whereas those at the top possibly have continued with their lives, business as usual, whereas they say they're fighting for us. What do we need to do with our leaders at the end of the day?
I think the issue around the elections in this country and the problem with the leadership is one that can be answered more from a tribal point of view than an issue point of view. The problems and the issues and poverty in this country is the same among all our people. But who, in that small strip which we have played, who has addressed the issues that have taken them to represent our people? None of them. Maybe when you talk about the people, you might say the people are going to say what is the agenda. But when you are just going to talk so that you keep our people divided on tribal lines, and you're not dealing with the issues in the coast province, now I have found it has become a region again. Nyanza region, or even Western region, something that we thought is not constitutional, and it's coming from the leaders, keeping our people divided because of immediate personal gain, holding on to office, and they don't want to deal with the issues about poverty. There's nothing more important. You see, our fight for independence now, I got a perspective. I'm old enough to know that. I got a perspective about it. Look at our fight for independence. It was about the improvement of the lives of our people. Now, what have we done in 53 years? We have made a lot of our people poorer. There are more people who are now suffering. Look at the question of starvation and poverty. So what I would say is we need a very good national conference around the issues. I don't know who is going to do that. Who is going to call our country into order?
The national conference address our issues, because we've had so many commissions come up.
Nothing
they have
happens.
defined clearly, it's on paper, what our problems are. But we don't seem to find anybody who's willing to address them and say, look, Kenya, stop. We need to do this. Wanjiru.
Yes, and building, I'm seeing a kind of jump in Wanjiru's logic from our present situation to the conference. Because I believe the reason NASA have taken the action they've taken is because there is no dialogue. And dialogue about what? We went into an election, August 8th, with an expectation that it would be free and fair. It was not free and fair. In fact, it was grossly undermined due to the manipulation or the failures of the IBC, and that's in the Supreme Court ruling. That is not actually contested and a subject of contestation. So half the country viewed their vote as stolen, whereas the other half, who had won, viewed the Supreme Court ruling as Wakora network propaganda. That is where the problem comes in. Because when you say that people are hungry, we have poverty, we have inequality, yes, all of that is true. But democracy there's no dichotomy. We don't have to choose between democratic right, the right to free and fair elections, and the right to good governance and socio-economic rights. These two go together. The actions of NASA, I believe, are in response to what they perceive as an inability to force a dialogue around an unfair electoral process. Because what NASA have put on they put on the table around the electoral process, the irreducible minimums and all of that, but the overarching goal, and if you look at their manifesto, they had said, and this was as part of their campaign strategy, we need to go back into the Constitution and make our electoral process equitable, because it's not equitable. We need to secure money for county governments, 45%, because right now national government is doling it out, and through administrative means, they're able to, at the end of the year, they are not even giving, they'll say on paper they've given 23%, but in reality, maybe only 17, 18% goes.
An accountability issue.
It's accountability, but also it's about, part of what NASA was saying is safeguard it in the Constitution, that this money will be 45%, and that the means of transfer is not based on this. There's less discretion on the national government in terms of withholding. So because NASA has been unable to find a place to have the discussion about what we have all agreed is a fundamental problem. There is a problem if you go into an election, half the country votes one way, the other half votes the other way, and then for the next 5 years, half the country is not represented. Why aren't they represented? Because of the winner takes all. because we have a majoritarian system. And this majoritarian system was identified as a problem even during the constitution review-making process. It's just that in Kilifi, when there were negotiations around the various drafts, and then again, I believe there was a Naivasha meeting, there were the parliamentary system was removed. The mixed member proportional representation never picked ground. There were fears about it. So what we are saying is that almost 10 years, 7, 8 years into the implementation of the Constitution, there is still a problem we didn't resolve in the constitution-making process. It's time we revisit that and level the playing field and the representation in the electoral process. Questions have been brought about the presidential process, and that's where the dialogue needs to happen. Now, because the Jubilee administration has not opened up to this discussion, because we'd have expected them to say, yes, it's true, the IBC mismanaged, yes, indeed, there is a problem, let's find a solution, but let's first finish the electoral process. That didn't happen. They went to the defense of the IBC and criticized the Supreme Court. So they took a position equally. Because of lack of space, NASA are then now using non-coercive methods of protest, because they have seen every time we go to the street, the Juakali trader can't run their business. So what do? Let's hit out at Safaricom. Let's hit out at Brookside. Let's hit out at this. Do an economic boycott. Economic boycott is a perfectly valid means of protest, because you're saying we need to be heard. Then, because they're not able to harness their numbers in the assembly, because now the majority of Jubilee is even higher, they are then now using this other means to be heard. So it's not about the citizens' assembly. It's really about, can Jubilee acknowledge we have this problem and find a framework for discussion. Whether it's a national dialogue or not, doesn't matter. The main thing is to say we acknowledge we have this problem. We must review our electoral system. Not to have a dysfunctional discussion where it's accusations and saying they don't have investment in business, so they don't mind disrupting. You know, that really is very, that is what I was telling you, is really just dehumanizing parts of this country.
We need to look at solutions. We're also trying to manage time, so we need to get to solutions.
We have a structural problem, but I think he's saying that we should go to a national conference, and she has actually articulated that it depends on what you are going to discuss there at the national conference. But let me say here, as a person who has done elections, as a person who has looked at organizations, I can tell you for sure that what Jubilee needs to do is they need to re-engineer themselves. I think once Jubilee re-engineers themselves, as a body, because you need to be, as she said correctly, you need to be there to say if there is a national dialogue, yes, we are ready to come, and yes, as people who are in government, people who are required to administer, people who are required to govern. You see, we are going to actually discuss these issues. But the way they are across the board, and for the last 4 years, they are like, we shall show you, we have the power, we have the numbers, and we shall show you. But then, when you come to the output, it is zero. And that's what Wanjiru is talking about. You see, across all the sectors, you have problems across all the sectors. If we are to do statistics right now, we will have problems across all the sectors. We have talked about the Golanas of this world. Why would you do that? Why would you actually go to Golana? Why would you do something that economically does not make sense? Any first-year student at the University of Nairobi in economics will tell you from the beginning that that was not going to go anywhere. Now, I think national dialogue is good, and I think the people who have been around like him need to coerce around, and now when we have the first dialogue, we must now decide what the agenda is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wanjiru, you've talked about a national conference. What should be the content of that national conference? And what is it? Because looking at it from where we are now, it looks like it's not something that would have to be forced to be had. Our leaders are not willing to come and sit together and have that, create that environment for dialogue for whatever reason. It needs to be forced by one thing or the other, maybe by the boycotts that are going on, maybe by protests which are enshrined in the Constitution. So what conversation should we have? So at this point, I want us to release KTN Home and come back with that answer. So for those of us watching on KTN Home, we'll say goodbye. But on KTN News, we continue with this discussion. And later on, we'll also be looking at a very important day in the United States, and that's Thanksgiving Day. But that will be coming up later. But for now, we release KTN Home and say goodbye. Sorry. So coming back to that question, what should be the content of that dialogue? And it looks like it has to be forced.
I totally agree with Wanjiru. I totally agree with her. The problem is mainly with the Jubilee. When you have been elected in Parliament, you have a president. Show leadership. There is nothing like it. Be magnanimous even when you claim victory. There's nothing like it. Allow this new Kenya to be born. Don't tie Kenya to this poverty, lack of debate, a situation where every 5 years we are fighting. National conference is good enough, but I also think there is the question of the Constitution. The Constitution in this country, Wanjiru again has gone through it very well. I remember all that, what happened. I was in the no campaign. Not that we are being vindicated, but there are very fundamental issues that are in the Constitution today. Only Kenya today and the United States of America claim the imperial president. There are only two countries now. Look at the whole of Europe. Look at the whole of Latin America. We don't have a president who is so powerful that eventually you have a cabinet where he decides. There is going to be no proper vetting of who is going to be in the cabinet. Just look at what has happened in 5 years about all these cabinet secretaries. They all leave after 1 billion shillings have disappeared, and we have no way of recovering. So what I'm saying is, a second look at our Constitution between the two parties in the national conference. That is very important because that is when we are going to dismantle this imperial presidency so that we have a prime minister in this country who can be sacked tomorrow because you are not carrying on the national agenda. Let us not have this 5-year term where the president is going to be there certainly now for the next 5-year term, and there's nothing you can do about it. Whether he is dealing with the issues or not, he is not interested. He is there for 5 years. But if it is a prime minister, tomorrow if you are unhappy, by sunset he will be out.
He can be out. All right, Wanjiru, we are basically coming to winding up, but is an expanded executive a solution that possibly we should be considering as a country?
Absolutely not. I think you missed the gist of the discussion. We need to re-engineer the process. We didn't finish the constitution-making process. There's a big stumbling block. Our presidential system is not working for Kenya. We have to deal with that. Possibly even our electoral process is not working for Kenya. And that's the big discussion. For me, the other big discussion is the violence, is the killings around this election. Some of them, going through the police justifications they've given, the police were under threat in a few instances. But in majority of the instances, it was use of excessive force. It was use of state, police force to subjugate genuine expression. Who gave the orders to use excessive force? Who gave the orders to shower water cannons and tear gas on protesters who are marching on Uhuru Highway? Who gave those orders? And what's going to be done about them? Because you can't negotiate, by the way, when you have in a situation where there is state brutality being used as a threat of force. So Jubilee has to create the conditions for dialogue. One, they have to acknowledge there is a problem. Two, they have to acknowledge the problem as identified. And three, they have to desist with the use of force and need an act on those officers and those who gave instructions for the killings of innocent Kenyans who are demonstrating against the stealing of the vote.
All right.
Yeah, I think that I'm not quite sure that actually, I disagree with this fact that we need to get a prime minister. Or I think the problem is that this TNA/Jubilee have not actually done their work. Because why is it that between 2002 and 2012, we were not talking about having a prime minister? Why is it that we were not saying that the constitution is not working? You see, when you are an institution, and the constitution in this case is like a strategy, your strategy in the organization, you do a review periodically. They say in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. So the issue here is that, yes, we can go and review the Constitution if that's what people perceive is a problem. The problem is who is doing it. Are the people reviewing the Constitution, reviewing it to suit themselves so that we put ourselves into more problems? Or are they reviewing the Constitution to match what the gaps are? Because in any organization, you identify the gaps, then you get solutions to those gaps. So my worry is we are not actually, I don't think that the Jubilee administration have the required competence to go and review the Constitution, which will be good for all of us. I think we need to understand that if we are going to let them lead that process, and I think that's where NASA is coming from, that you cannot have people who undermine the process, again lead the process. Yeah, I think we really have to be clear, and I think the people who are involved in calling for a review of the Constitution have to be cognizant of that. That right. you cannot, just the same thing as when we say we want to review IEBC. And when they were saying that you need to review IEBC before we go to the 26th elections. Now, the issue is who is doing it. Because you cannot, and we need to run away from this idea that if you are chosen by Jubilee or if you are chosen by NASA to represent them in a situation, then you have narrow interests rather than representing the interests of the country. Of the country.
Yeah.
Wanjiru.
Yeah, just picking up on that, and I do agree, IBC, the two leaders, the chair, the CEO, should be held account. Actually, they shouldn't be in that position. It was unfortunate. The Constitution kind of was a bit complicated in terms of how to deal with them. They should be held to account. As an example to other public leaders, that when you take a position, you have to serve the people, the interest of the people. And linked to that is I was at a meeting yesterday where the deputy governor was meeting residents of Karangata, and we're interested as an institution that works with devolution and looking at all of that. And something he said was of great interest, because he talked about one of their pillars about being people and culture. And he said the problem is our value system is completely broken. We don't follow traffic laws, we don't pay our taxes, we are not law-abiding. So as part of this discussion, we have to recognize we have a toxic political culture. And Kriegler said this when he was giving his report and said people need not have died. We had sufficient legislation to have allowed a sufficiently good election, but the people responsible maneuvered and undermined the process and were complicit. And then he said on top of that, the witnesses who came to give evidence against the PV and all of that gave testimonies which they recanted and they lied. And he said at the end of the day, Kenyans, you have a beautiful country, but your values, we have to recognize we have a crisis. We adore money. We adore any means to money. Power. And this has invaded, headmasters are selling school spaces instead of giving education. We have religious organizations that are complicit, are part of the process, even civil society. Our political leaders are the pinnacle of this collapse of values. So the re-engineering we need is not the re-engineering that Jubilee is trying to do of re-engineering away our democracy into an autocracy, because that's what they want to do. We need a re-engineering of our moral values, of our civic values. Because as a country, even if we amend the Constitution and we don't deal with our values, we will not get beyond where we are.
Beyond where we are. All right, let's have our closing comments. Wanjiru, as we wind up, what is it that we need to do? We do know that as per the Constitution on the 28th, which is going to be Tuesday, Uhuru Kenyatta is sworn in as president. That doesn't even start by solving our problem. What does he need to do to ensure that we are at a better place in the future?
We just have to accept that whether it is Jubilee or NASA, both of them in this country are not more than 2 years. They are not more than 2 years old, but the issues have persisted since independence and even before that. So that is what we need to accept, that we need to have depth in terms of why are the problems being carried forward when the parties are changing it before every election. Why are the problems being carried forward? And they are very fundamental issues. So that is what I'm saying, that the president, Uhuru, has got a beautiful name. And it embodies a lot of the aspirations of what is in NASA and what is in Jubilee. The basic issues are mainly economic and also this new culture that has come in this country where there is no man or woman of integrity. It's all about lying and big money. And when you are becoming a millionaire, when you become a millionaire on public funds, what kind of pride is there? Why don't you become like Delamere, whom today we still remember, because of his in-depth knowledge and investment in agriculture or in industry, something that has got value to this country. Why do you want to drive the biggest car in town when all your money has come from the back door, which is a very unfortunate.
Dr. Gitiabi, your closing comments and what we need as solutions.
Yeah, I agree with him entirely. And it's just, in this country, public offices, I've never seen any country except here where public people get rich being in public office. Around the world, people get rich first, then they go to public office, or they go to public office to serve. But here we have rich people who have no pedigree. You know, as he has just said, they can, a minister of agriculture or a minister of devolution for that matter, if you meet her or him, they cannot tell you what they did. You can't remember what they did. I can't remember what they did. I can't see what they did. And so we need to go back to making our institutions work. We will not accept a situation where we have fraudulent elections. Year come, year in. Year come, year in. We will not. I think that Uhuru and his administration have to make sure that this is the last fraudulent elections that we are ever going to have.
But our fraudulent elections may not necessarily be beginning at the election point, because when we look at what Wanjiru said in our value system, just go to our simple traffic rules and regulations.
He needs to sort it out.
We as Kenyans do not obey them.
Yeah, but it is because the people who enforce them also don't have values. So the person who enforces, for example, I am a very good example. By the way, I don't bribe and I don't take bribe. I have never. Yeah, but but I've been stopped by police. I have even been taken to a police station. Yeah, but I tell the police that just tell me what is it that I did wrong. If I did wrong, you charge me. The problem with what you have just said is that both the person who is enforcing, like now the ones who are in the national cohesion, and you know the national cohesion,
integration, NCIC.
Yes, and the people who are enforcing security, like what happened on Friday, last Friday, was not a scene from the movie. This was a scene from what you can see in South Africa. There is a problem between the value system across the board. The person who enforces and the one who is to be enforced.
All right. Wanjiru, your closing comments.
It's hard to give closing comments after those excellent comments. And I really associate myself with those remarks that Uhuru needs to live up to his name. And I think that's a very good way of putting it. Uhuru embodies the aspirations of both sides. And it can't be business as usual. We have a major problem. I was at a meeting recently and a wise gentleman from SUPKEM said, Kenya is going through a rebirth. And this rebirth will either be a smooth one, or it will be one that is steeped in violence and in division. So if the extent to which Uhuru refuses to acknowledge that we have a problem and refuses to foster the dialogue will force the country into sharper division, into more deaths, and that blood will be squarely on his hands as the leader and the person who has really the responsibility and the power to convene that dialogue. We then expect, of course, of the opposition to be honest brokers when they come to the table. They've represented the aspirations of many who were disenfranchised out of the decisions of the mismanagement of the elections. But we also expect no posturing by the opposition, not to have very clear positions and to negotiate in the best interest of Kenyans, like Dr. Kitabi said, not in their own interest so that they can ascend to power, just to sort this problem for posterity, not necessarily for these leaders. In fact, properly speaking, speaking, those involved in these negotiations should not be eligible to benefit from the output of those so that we can temper that self-interest. And I hope that can happen.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning. That's Dr. Kitiabi, Wanjiru Gikonyo, and Wanjiru Kihoro for joining us this morning. And that's the State of the Nation. It is now 10 minutes after 8. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more stories making headlines right here on